Finally onto the neutral cards, let's try to get through these quick. First up we have Potion Vendor, so it's like a scaled down fungal enchanter. Generally when you scale down a card's stats and keep its battle cry, it makes it a better card. But once you get down to like 1 mana 1/1 for this sort of effect, it ends up just seeming a bit too inefficient. And consider that like Happy Ghoul is rotating out of standard, which makes this card look even less appealing. But maybe it makes its way into like Heal Druid or something. I think it's a little bit on the weak end though. Toxfin, on the other hand, seems like a very good card. I think it's worth pointing out that a 1 mana 1/2 Murloc already looks pretty appealing, because I really don't want to be playing a Murloc Raider in my deck. But maybe with Rockpool Hunter rotating out, this sort of stat line on a Murloc is a little bit less appealing. But it does have text in the text box, and it reminds me a lot of Hunter's Mark, which used to cost 1 mana and then had to get nerfed. So this is like a 1 mana Hunter's Mark for Murloc decks that also gives you a Murloc. So any Murloc deck I'm pretty sure is going to play this card. I don't know that it like makes a Murloc deck or anything, but 2 copies of this in all Murloc decks. Arcane Servant, Elemental Rivercroc. Seems like most of the Elemental synergy rotated out, so I don't expect this to see too much play. But maybe in some sort of like tempo mage deck that wants to play Mana Cyclone and Elemental Evocation, maybe this makes its way in there just for some more evocation consistency. Dalaran Librarian, so this is like a Silence Priest card, or at least that's how it was first shown. I don't really expect Silence Priest to be a thing. I don't think too many other decks are going to be playing Ancient Watcher or Arcane Watcher. And other than that, it's just a 2 mana 2/3, so probably won't see too much play. Evil Cable Rat is a 2 mana 1/1. Keep that shit away from all my decks. I acknowledge that the Lackey gives you back some of the tempo from your 2 mana 1/1, but I definitely don't think it's worth it. The only way this sees play is if Highspare and Togwaggle is just like the total nuts and rogue, and you need some minimum amount of Lackey generators to fuel it. But even then, like I think you might just play that deck without this card, just the Evil Miscreants. Hench-Clan Hogsteed, 5 stars. I think this card is sick. I built a bunch of decks before the expansion dropped, and pretty much all of my aggro decks were at least somewhat interested in playing this card. Has synergy with like Knife Juggler and Direwolf Alpha, but it's just an efficient card. It reminds me a lot of Argent Horse Rider, which was a 3 mana 2/1 Divine Shield Charge. This is a 2 mana 2/1, so same stat line. It has Rush instead of Charge, which is, obviously a downside. And instead of Divine Shield, the Death Rattle gives you something slightly smaller, but it's 1 mana less, so I think it's still very efficient. And with Keleseth rotating out, we need 2 drops. Mana Reservoir, so it gives you spell damage, and it has a lot of health, so it's probably going to stick around for a turn. But generally you don't care about your spell damage sticking around, you just play your spell damage minion, cast your spells, and you're done with it. But there is some stuff in this set that wants some spell damage synergy, so like maybe you want to play this on curve and then play Arcane Watcher and it can attack on turn 4, but I'd rather just play a spell damage thing on turn 4 then. I just don't think any of my decks are interested in having spell damage that sticks around like this, and as a 2 mana 0 power minion, the situations where it's not sticking around, it's just dying pretty much completely for free. So I don't like this card too much. Spellbook Binder seems like a very efficient card, a Bloodfin Raptor that sometimes draws a card, but I think it's pretty hard to activate the spell damage synergy on this guy. I did build a Tempo Mage that wanted to play a couple copies of these, but the deck itself didn't look all that impressive. Maybe you stick it in Shaman decks because of Spell Damage Totem or something, but Shaman already has other card draw, so not too interested in this I don't think. Sunraver Spy, another 5-star neutral common card. So you stick this card right into Secret Paladin, play your Secret on 1, play this thing on turn 2. I think Secret Paladin's probably going to be pretty good, and I think part of that is going to be because of how strong this card is. And if there's another class that plays Secrets, it probably plays this card too, but the other Secrets all suck. Faceless Rager. So if you go like Ancient Watcher on turn 2, you can play this on turn 3 as a 3 mana 5/5. But unless you're Silence Priest, you just have like a dead 2-drop sitting in play. And I don't think Silence Priest is looking very appealing. And even in that deck, sometimes there are going to be situations where you have this guy on turn 3 and no 2-drop, and he certainly looks pretty sketchy in that regard. And I think that's the general downfall of this card. Like, even if you have a lot of support for it, sometimes your opponent just clears your board and it's a Magma Rager. Alright, on to the next page, we have Flight Master. So I give this thing a 1-star because there are a ton of neutral spider tanks in the game right now, and I can't imagine why I would play this over any of them. How does any deck I build utilize the 2/2 Griffin better than what my opponent can do with it? Hench-Clan Sneak is a very generic looking 3-mana 3/3 stealth, but random idiots with stealth I think are actually better than people give them credit for. Jungle Panther is like an okay card, but it dies to Consecration, and this doesn't die to Consecration, which is pretty nice. I think as another example, Stranglethorn Tiger is a card that's pretty consistently underrated and sometimes can sneak its way into decks. And I think it's quite possible that we'll see just some random aggro deck that needs a 3-drop, and this card is pretty okay. Maybe it's like a Paladin deck that curves it into Blessing of Kings, or I guess neutrally you can curve it into like Defender of Argus or Dark Iron Dwarf or something. Seems pretty okay. Proud Defender seems pretty reminiscent of Tar Creeper, but I think it's a bit less efficient than Tar Creeper. 4-mana 4/6, a little bit less good than a 3-mana 3/5. But compared to Tar Creeper, I don't think you can really play this in your aggro or tempo decks, which maybe makes it a little bit better from a design perspective, but a little bit less playable. But it's still efficient enough that I expect some sort of control deck will probably end up playing it somewhere. I tried putting it in Control Warrior for the games where I don't find a Twilight Drake. Maybe some sort of like late game Druid deck or Mage deck or something could make use of it. Seems efficient enough that it'll probably be played somewhere. Soldier of Fortune, I don't like this card very much, because as it turns out, coins are actually pretty sick, so I don't want to give my opponent any coins. Now this does have less of a drawback than something like Hoarding Dragon rather, because if you just play this on curve and your opponent just straight up kills it, they don't actually get a coin. You have to actually get an attack in for them to get the coin, which is like pretty okay. But still, I just don't think it's overstated enough for this drawback. I don't want to play like a big thing and then ramp my opponent to their Twisting Nether so they can deal with my big thing. Next up we have Traveling Healer, which, just to keep it simple, seems like a shitty Earthen Ring Farseer to me, so I don't expect too much out of it. Violet Spellsword I think is actually a pretty reasonable card if you play a lot of spells in your deck. If you have just 3 spells in your hand, it's a 4-mana 4/6, which is like pretty playable. But the problem I found when I was building decks was if my deck had a lot of spells, I could probably just play Geppetto and draw my OP minions, and this is not a good enough minion for that kind of deck. But really, I think the power level on this card is pretty okay. Dalaran Crusader, I'm actually going to give 3 stars to. I don't think the card is great on its own. 5-mana 5/4 Divine Shield, just a very generic looking card. But with the rotation, we're losing Cobalt Scalebane, Bittertide Hydra, Fungalmancer, and if you're building some sort of mid-range or aggro deck, you need to be playing something on turn 5 in a lot of games, and this might just be the go-to 5-mana idiot that you want to put in those kinds of decks. I think this card has some potential to be played. It's not insane by any means, and you're probably not even going to be happy playing it, but you might have to play it. Eccentric Scribe I'm actually going to give a very similar review to as the Dalaran Crusader. There just aren't that many 6-drops, and sometimes your deck needs a 6-drop. I do think this is a bit better though. Compare it to like Savannah Highmane. It's a little bit less efficient and doesn't have Beast Synergy, but it's a neutral card, and arguably 4 1/1s is better than the 2 Hyenas, especially if you're playing something like Power of the Wild or something like that. So I could actually see this card seeing a bit of play, just because sometimes you need a 6-drop and there's no other 6-drop. Safeguard. I initially thought this card was pretty okay, and then I saw someone say, what about Rotten Apple Bomb? And I was like, wow, this card seems a lot worse than Rotten Apple Bomb. It does have some mech synergy, and the Death Rattle thing is also a mech, which can be pretty relevant, but I just don't think the card is good enough. And I don't think if you're playing like a War Gear deck that you want a Safeguard in your deck as well. And I think this is the last neutral common, the Violet Warden. So Archmage was already super unplayable, and I don't think giving it taunt makes it playable. Oh no, we do have a couple more neutral commons. First one is Heroic Innkeeper. So this is just like a big idiot that wants you to have a bunch of other stuff in play, and that's generally not very good. We saw that it kinda worked for Frostwolf Warlord in Paladin, in Odd Paladin specifically, because that hero power was extremely broken at just creating a bunch of stuff, and the Frostwolf Warlord came down 3 turns earlier than this card. I think the power level of this card is just like so low, I can't really think of a deck where I would want to play this. You need to have like 3 minions in play before you even start getting excited about it. Just seems really shitty. Burly Shovel Fist. This card doesn't seem very exciting, but it's like an okay big idiot that you can just throw into a deck. You need your big idiots to do stuff, and this guy is Rush, so like maybe it's okay. There's some Rush synergy in the game. Maybe you just need a big Rush idiot for your Countess Ashmore deck, but I don't think it's very good. Arcane Watcher, 3 mana 5/6, but you have to put some work into it. I think this is like one of the best cards in Silence Priest, but I don't think Silence Priest is going to be very good. I also considered just putting this into Tempo Mage that had a lot of spell damage minions, which seems fairly reasonable. And I put a couple copies into my Control Warrior deck, kind of like how the deck used to play Ancient Watcher with, you play like Iron Beak Owl or just Sun Fury Protector or whatever. I think it could be pretty reasonable in any of those decks. But the thing is, all 3 of the decks that I listed, I don't really have the highest of hopes for. The one I'm most interested in playing is probably the Control Warrior, or the Control Warlock rather. And I'm not even necessarily convinced that I would want to be playing this in that deck. But 3 stars just because I see a lot of potential out of it. Spellward Jeweler seems like a very 3-star card to me. It has okay stats, so you don't feel too bad about having it in your deck, and it can buy you a turn against like Holy Wrath Paladin or something, if the whole meta is Holy Wrath Paladins, or Malagos Druid or whatever. So I think the card is very okay. Maybe it's a specialist format card, or maybe you just play it in your deck that always seems to only need 1 more turn against Holy Wrath Paladin or something. Next up we have Hecklebot, which seems like a pretty good card to me. It's neutral combo disruption, which is always welcome. You can also just play it on turn 4 against aggro and not feel too upset about it, unless you hit their Sea Giant or something. And also it has some mech synergy. You can play this on turn 4 and then strap a Ziliax to it on turn 5. Or you can play this in the Mech Hunter deck that wants to be pulling stuff off Oblivitron. I like the idea of this card in that deck. But just in general, very efficient card. It does something pretty unique for a neutral card that's always welcome, so I like it a lot. Portal Keeper. So it's like a neutral Faldore Strider with more attack. But also the things you summon are way smaller and it dies to backstab. So, not too excited about it. I mean, I actually like the effect on this card a lot, and I feel like the effect is powerful, even if it's not 4/4 spiders. But man, do I not want to play something for 4 mana that dies to backstab. Recurring Villain is another card that I like a lot. It's actually super sick with Sword of Justice because it keeps coming back and then buffing itself up. But in general, I think it's going to be hard to consistently get the attack of this card enough to get value out of it. And if you can't buff it consistently, it's just a 5 mana 3/6, which is pretty weak. But it's a pretty cool card. Sunreaver Warmage seems like a very powerful card to me. We've seen in the past how good Blackwing Corruptor was, and I think this card is just better than Blackwing Corruptor. But I'm just not entirely convinced that too many decks really want to play this card. Like, you're obviously not playing it in anything other than Control. But even in your Control decks, you still have to commit to playing like double Twisting Nether, double Siphon Soul, which can still sometimes be kind of difficult. And if you're playing a slow Control deck, maybe it's like a Dragon package, in which case you're already playing Crowd Roaster, which might end up being a little bit redundant with this card. But I do expect it to see some amount of play at least. It's a very powerful card in a vacuum at least. Next up we have Mad Summoner, which summons 6 things for me and 7 things for my opponent, so that seems like a real bummer. It obviously has some token synergies, So maybe your deck can use the 1/1s better than your opponent. Maybe you play double Jumbo Imp, double Sea Giant. But even like for that kind of deck, this card is just way too slow. So yeah, don't expect too much out of this. Next up we have Exotic Mount Seller, which is like Big Violet Teacher. But the problem with being Big Violet Teacher is you have less mana to cast your spells. And if you're playing this at like turn 9, so you can cast a couple spells along with it, that's like pretty deep into Twisting Nether, Brawl, Equality Consecration territory. So I think this effect comes out a little bit too late in the game for it to really be that powerful of a card. But the effect on it definitely is powerful, and if it did end up seeing some play, I wouldn't be terribly surprised. I considered like a build of Token Druid with this card. I considered a build of Muckmorpher Shaman with this card. But in general, I think it's probably just not quite powerful enough to be worth building around. Next up we have Tunnel Blaster. So in the past we saw that Chillmaw did see a bit of play, but I think this card is worse than Chillmaw. The thing about Chillmaw is the Death Rattle is good against aggressive board-oriented decks, but against other decks you could also just smack him for 6. And this guy only smacks for 3, which is a lot less than 6. And also this isn't activating your other dragon cards like Chillmaw did. So that makes me a lot less excited for this than I was for Chillmaw. But it is neutral AoE, so it has some potential. I just don't expect too much out of it though. For the final neutral rare we have Underbelly Ooze. After this survives damage, summon a copy of it, so the copy is also damaged, making it pretty hard to go infinite with it, like Grim Patron or something like that. And this thing is also at 7 mana 3/5. Really don't want to be putting a 7 mana 3/5 in my deck, especially one that requires additional support once it's already on the board. And because all your copies are damaged, even if you manage to pop off, it still dies to Flame Strike. So, not too interested in this. Call me when we can give it charge. Magic Carpet. So this is actually a pretty sick effect if you play a lot of 1-drops. It's pretty comparable to Hobgoblin. But compared to Hobgoblin, the Magic Carpet's not really doing too much if you're ahead, which if your deck is playing 15 1-drops, you're really hoping that you're ahead at this point in the game. And with Hobgoblin, you just like play your thing, it gets more stats. More stats are always good, kind of regardless of where you are in the game. If there's nothing to rush into, this is a 3 mana 1/6. And as a 3 mana 1/6, while it is definitely survivable, it doesn't fight back very well. So very situational, very low attack on this card. I think even like the Token Zoo deck that plays like 19 cards that cost 1 mana, I think even that deck might not be that excited about this card. Next we have Hench-Clan Hag, a 4 mana 3/3 that summons 2 1/1s. So I want to compare this to Grim Necromancer, which was a 4 mana 2/4 that summoned 2 1/1s, and was not a very good card. I think a 2/4 is probably better than a 3/3, so I also don't think this is a very good card. It of course does have some like Murloc, Mech, Pirate synergy, but I don't think any of that's going to end up being relevant. Azurite Elemental. So at the start of your turn, gain +2 spell damage. That means the turn you play this, it doesn't have spell damage. That means it needs to survive a turn to do pretty much anything, which pretty much just makes this a bad card, I think. I mean, it does have 7 health, that's a lot. 5 mana 7 health thing is reasonably likely to survive a turn. But generally, when you need spell damage, you need it now. Like, you can't play this thing, and then, okay, I'm gonna Arcane Missiles you next turn, buddy, watch out. It's just not nearly as impactful as just having the spell damage immediately. I did consider putting 1 copy of this in my Elemental Aggro Mage, just because I felt like I really needed to find another Elemental for Elemental Evocation, but I think it probably isn't even good in that deck. Portal Overfiend, so very similar to the other Portal card we saw. As a 6 mana 5/6, this is a little bit more efficiently statted, and I do think the 2 mana Rush Demons are powerful, but it feels like most of the decks that would want to pull 2/2 Rush minions out of their deck probably can't really support the card draw to support this card. And also it's a 6 mana 5/6, which if you're in some sort of aggressive or tempo deck is not a very impressive stat line. Unseen Saboteur, so this is a better 6 mana 5/6 I think. It's combo disruption, and even against non-combo decks you can just use it to snipe like a Brawl. Like if this is the only minion in play when you play it and you get your opponent's Brawl, you just killed one of their cards for free. Or you can make them cast a Shield Slam and they have no armor or something like that. So it's just generically pretty powerful. You don't feel too bad about having it in your deck. And it's very good at disrupting like Mechathune combos or something like that. So if there are combo decks, I expect slow decks to play this card. Batterhead is kind of like a neutral AoE card, which is pretty impressive, but it's pretty expensive at 8 mana, and situational in how well it can AoE the opponent's board. Like if your opponent has a ton of small stuff that this could normally kill, but they also just have Booty Bay Bodyguard, you suddenly can't kill the other 6 minions that you normally could have killed. So very situational card, probably just costs too much mana, but maybe it's good in like Countess Ashmore decks or something like that if you just need a rush synergy card. Whirlwind Tempest is such a sick card, but the problem is so few Wind Fury cards are actually playable. We're losing Corpse Taker. Maybe if Corpse Taker was still around, this could have been pretty interesting. But it's going to be hard to find any Wind Fury minion really worth playing. The only cool thing I've seen with this card is the Shaman spell, Wind Fury, is 2 mana. So for 10 mana you can play this plus that. And if you have an 8 power minion play already, that's just 32 damage out of this combo. Or, I mean, even if you get like a 5 power minion, that's 20 damage out of this combo. And if you hit like either of those off of Farsight, or you can Eureka this guy out, just find some way to make that combo cheaper. You can also throw in like Rockbiter weapon, so if any 5 power thing sticks on the board, that's just lethal damage, even if your opponent's at full health. So in the very specific case of a Shaman deck playing the Wind Fury spell, this could see play. And that spell actually got quite a bit better recently because it's pretty nasty with Zentimo. So maybe that could actually be some sort of Shaman deck, but I think it's probably a bit too situational. Keep in mind this thing is an 8 mana 6/6, so you can't really just play it on its own. But definitely a cool card. Big Bad Archmage, 4 stars. I'm all in on Muckmorpher Shaman. This card is sick in Muckmorpher Shaman. Pull this guy out on turn 5. He's a 4/4 that summons a random 6-drop. I love it. Now, if that deck isn't good, this card is absolute trash because no one else would even consider playing it. But I think it's going to be sick in that deck. Finally, we're onto the Legendaries, the home stretch, and we start with the Legendary that was released prior to the expansion, Archmage Vargoth. So this card is very strong. It was really sick with like Oaken Summons or Diamond Spellstone, basically stuff that can summon this, and then it can also summon other stuff. But we're losing a lot of those cards to the rotation. There is still Mass Resurrection, which is pretty good with this card. And just in general, I mean, like if you cast an Animal Companion or something like that, this card is very powerful. So I definitely expected to see a lot of play. I was ready to give it 5 stars, but I built like 30 decks before the expansion dropped, and I was just really surprised at how few decks I actually ended up putting this in. So I did scale my review back to a 4-star rating, but the card is definitely powerful. Barista Lynchen, another 4-star legendary. So I think you can pretty reasonably compare this to like Azure Drake, 5 mana 4 power draw a card. But this has more health than Azure Drake, and it can draw a lot more cards. Now sometimes it can draw 0 cards, which is pretty disappointing, but I don't think the condition of have a Battlecry minion in play is very difficult, and I think it's pretty easy to have more than one in play. I think this fits pretty nicely into decks that want to play a dragon package, because there's like Fire Tree, Witch Doctor, Twilight Drake, Dragon Maw Scorcher, Crowd Roaster. This card is also pretty good in Shutterwalk Shaman decks because they play a lot of battle cries, and also this gets copied with your Shutterwalk. There's just a ton of applications for this card, and it's very efficient, so I think it'll see some play. Chef Nomi, 2 stars. I think this is the worst of the neutral legendaries, but it is a powerful effect. We saw that people played Dragon Caller Alana, which is a worse effect than this card, right? It gave you 5/5s instead of 6/6s. But the problem is, it's pretty hard to actually completely run out of cards, and if you are running out of cards, why aren't you just killing the opponent with Mechathune? But if you're up against like Druid or something, this effect does basically end the game similar to Mechathune. The problem is when you're against Warrior and they cast Brawl, or Priest casts Mass Hysteria or something like that. So I just don't think it's reliable enough as a finisher. You can throw it in a Myra's Unstable Evolution deck, and that could be pretty nasty. But man, do you feel bad in the games where you don't draw the legendary spell. Archivist Elysiana, 5 stars. So this is the big neutral thing you put in your deck when you don't want to lose fatigue, and it's extremely good at not losing fatigue. I think it's actually so good at not losing fatigue that the metagame might end up warping around this card. It could just be the case that every single control deck has to play this card, because every other control deck is playing this card. And if you end up in a control mirror where one person has this and the other doesn't, the person who has it just wins like every time. Now, it's very possible that the latter environment is just one such that fatigue doesn't exist, in which case this card probably won't see too much play, but it's still probably going to end up being relevant in specialist format. So I think this card just has to see play. Like, maybe there's some fringe chance it doesn't see play in this expansion, but it's going to see play in the next 2 years. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And finally, Geppetto Joybuzz, ending on a high note with a 5-star card. This card just seems ridiculously powerful to me. It might end up being like one of the most defining cards in the set. Because without even thinking too deeply about it, it's just like pick a class, play this, Alexstrasza, and Malygos, and you can probably kill the opponent. There's 9 chances for that to be a good deck. And beyond that, this thing also discounts like Kalecgos, Archmage Antonidas, even just a value card like Tyrion. Or like I played a deck that had Sunreaver War Mages in it, and I was like, I guess if I hit Sunreaver War Mage, I'm still pretty happy with this card. I don't know specifically what deck is going to abuse this the best, but I built 3 decks that played this and the Malygos Alexstrasza combo. They all looked solid, and there has to just be something broken this card can do. So that's it, I finally finished reviewing all the cards. And I don't want to waste too much time closing out this video because I want to go actually play with the new cards and see how totally wrong I was about absolutely everything.